It appears now that Assad is worried enough that he's inviting Russian advisors in and Russian equipment in. And that won't change our core strategy, which is to continue to put pressure on ISIL in Iraq and Syria. But we are going to be engaging Russia to let them know that you can't continue to double down on a strategy that's doomed to failure. And if they are willing to work with us and the 60-nation coalition that we put together, then there's the possibility of a political settlement in which Assad would be transitioned out and a new coalition of moderate, secular and inclusive forces could come together and restore order in the country. That's our goal. This is going to be a long discussion that we'll be having with the Russians. But it is not going to prevent us from continuing to go after ISIL very hard. It could prevent us from arriving at the political settlement. That ultimately is needed to bring a peace back to Syria. And this is where our military efforts have to be combined with effective diplomatic efforts. One of the things that I've said to all of our men and women in uniform is that you shouldn't be fighting for our security and our freedom alone. You've got to have the support of diplomats and intelligence experts and others. Because although you are vital and necessary, if you're doing it by yourselves, we can win any battle, but our main challenge right now in a lot of these countries like Syria and Afghanistan and Libya and North Africa is disorder. And the only way you restore order unless you're occupying every country. That starts breaking down is through political negotiations and settlement. And that's where the Russians are going to have to start getting a little smarter than they have been. Because they are threatened in many ways more than we are by ISIL. They've got large Muslim populations that historically have caused a lot of problems inside of Russia. And the strategy that they're pursuing right now of doubling down on Assad, I think, is a big mistake. Moderator Perry, thank you, Sergeant Gizi, for that question from Afghanistan. We here at the Defense Media Activity do hope that you and others downrange do stay safe. We do have thousands of members overseas watching the American Forces Network. Or they're streaming live on Defense. Gov, and they, too, are eager to talk to you, Mr. President. And they can through social media. In fact, Petty Officer Laurie Bent is going to take us out there now. Moderator Bent, our next question is going to come from Twitter. Sir, we have a question from JRita2192. Mr. President, can you share with us your personal experience and memories of when 9/11 first happened? President Obama, it was interesting. Michelle and I were just talking about that this morning. Sasha, my youngest daughter, had just been born. She was 4 or 5 months old. And September 11th was Malia's first day of preschool or kindergarten. I think it was kindergarten. So Michelle had gone with the girls to drop Malia off at school. They were tiny. I was at the time a state senator. So I was going to downtown Chicago to a hearing on an issue. and I remember driving on Lakeshore Drive in Chicago and hearing the reports of a plane crashing into the buildings. And at first, the reports were unclear, so you thought it was a Cessna or some accident had happened. And it wasn't until I got downtown to where the hearing was taking place that we started realizing it was something much more serious. And at that time, no one was sure whether this was a one-off or whether this was going to be an ongoing attack. Because then you started getting reports from the Pentagon and other places. So the building was evacuated. And I remember standing downtown Chicago with thousands of other people. And there were a lot of targets, obviously. For possible action, this including at the time, it was called the Sears Tower. And people didn't know what to think. And then I remember going to my law office. And that's when we saw the images of the Twin Towers starting to come down. And that evening, I have very vivid memories of giving Sasha a bottle and rocking her to sleep while we were watching the aftermath of those attacks. And like I think everybody here, although most of you were a lot younger, it gave you a sense. For the first time in my lifetime, that our homeland could be vulnerable in that way. We hadn't seen an attack like that since Pearl Harbor. And I think it inspired all of us to remember just how precious what we have is. And the need for us to defend it at any cost. And although subsequently I would have strong disagreements with the previous administration about certain decisions that were made, I remember and give great credit to President Bush for being at the site. Throwing out that first pitch at Yankee Stadium, and everyone remembering that you're not a Democrat first or a Republican first. Or a Texan first or Californian first, you're an American, and that we all have to come together. And my hope is always on a day like today that we remember that sense that what binds us together is much more important than anything that divides us, and that what makes this country special is the fact that we are bound together. We or our parents, or our great-grandparents, we all come from different places. But we all have a shared creed, a shared belief system, and a shared set of commitments. And all of you in your service exemplify that every day. Moderator Perry, it was an excellent question from social media. And our viewers can join us and join this conversation on social media from Twitter using the hashtag #AskPotus. Or the Department of Defense's Facebook page. We're actually going to go back overseas for you, Mr. President, and Petty Officer Lori Bent is going to take us there. Moderator Bent, sir, we are headed to NATO Brussels. Belgium, where we're going to talk to Navy Commander Scott Cregan. Commander Cregan, go ahead with your question for the President. Commander Cregan, thank you for your time, Mr. President. I was honored to march in your inaugural parade in 2009. And we briefly met a few years later when I worked a Halloween White House event. I was a Star Wars stormtrooper. President Obama, you were great. Commander Kragan, you may not remember what I looked like because we all kind of looked alike. On a serious note, we're seeing more and more refugees coming to Europe by land and by sea. Do you think there should be a NATO response to this crisis? President Obama, I think that we have to work with our European partners on this issue. The refugee crisis is not just a European problem, it's a world problem. And we have obligations. I made certain to send through every agency that we've got to do our part. First of all, in taking our share of refugees. And those of you who saw some of these heartbreaking images of that small boy drowned, I think anybody who's a parent understands that that stirs all of our consciences, not just folks on the other side of the Atlantic. So I've already been in discussions with people like Prime Minister Renzi of Italy, the Greeks. And others who are down south about how we can enhance maritime efforts to make sure, first of all, that people who are loading up on these rickety boats are safe and we're not seeing enormous loss of life there. We are encouraged by the efforts of the European Union to accept refugees. In all countries and spread out some of the burdens and the pressure. And as I said, the United States needs to do our share. I said that we should establish a floor of at least 10,000 refugees that we're willing to accept. And cut through some of the bureaucracy and red tape to do that. Ultimately, though, as you well know, it is really important for us to go to the source. There's the old story about if you see a bunch of bodies floating down a river. Part of your job is to pull those folks out and save who you can, but you've also got to go downstream and see what exactly is happening. And this refugee crisis is prompted by the collapse of governance in Syria and the growth of ISIL and the cruelty that Assad is perpetrating on his own people. And that's why the response I gave earlier, the importance of us continuing our military efforts against ISIL. But also trying to pull together a strong international diplomatic effort to bring about some sort of political accord inside of Syria is going to be so important and so vital. Last point I'll make about this, though, and this is where NATO planning becomes critical. Even as we're, in the short term, helping countries respond to the immediate crisis, unfortunately, we can anticipate that refugees will be an ongoing problem for decades to come. And the reason is because there are too many states that are not doing well by their people. The spread of media gives people in war-torn countries or in extreme poverty a vision of a better life. And they are desperate and willing to take extraordinary risks to get there. You then have other factors that may end up resulting in more migration and refugees, for example, climate change. I just came back from Alaska, where you're seeing glaciers melt rapidly. And as temperatures rise, the Pentagon's own assessment is that this will end up being a national security challenge. In part because people will be displaced from their traditional lands either by drought or by flooding, and that can create more refugee problems.